Hello, creeplings, or should I say, I bid you welcome. Because today we are talking about one of my absolute favorite vampire films of all time, Bram Stoker's Dracula. This film was released in the early 90s. I want to say it was 1992. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola with a star studded cast. This was Gary Oldman's, I believe, first big American film. And I mean, to start out with Francis Ford Coppola as your first big American film, that was I don't want to say lucky break, but the stars did align. So Gary Oldman as Dracula, or Vlad Tepes, Vlad the Impaler. You have Winona Ryder as Wilhelmina Murray. Keanu Reeves as Jonathan Harker. Sadie Frost, this was her first film. She played Lucy Westenra. You have Carrie Elways. Billy Campbell from The Rocketeer. You have Tom Waits shows up. The singer, known for like Downtown Train and Little Drop of Poison. Oh, I love that song. He plays Renfield. And then you have Sir Anthony Hopkins as... He does a triple role, actually. His main role is Abraham von Helsing. And then you also have him as a priest in the very beginning of the prequel portion of it. As well as he's the main narrator. There's a lot of people in this film that are just amazing. It is the story of Dracula that you know and love. It is based on the book, but they added another level to it by adding the love story. The love story between Mina being the reincarnation of Dracula's wife was not in the books, but it added another level of just amazing. I'm not going to get too much into the story because everybody knows the story of Dracula. Renfield was the first solicitor sent over to help him buy land. He goes crazy, gets sent back. Jonathan Harker gets sent to finish the job. He ends up being in prison. Dracula comes to London and starts his murder spree. First with Lucy. Poor Lucy. And then he goes after... They figure out what's going on. Call in Van Helsing. And just... all hell breaks loose. Like I said, the casting in this one is amazing. I will address the elephant in the room for anybody who has seen this film and has read the reviews from back in the day. This is something we've all talked about. Poor Keanu Reeves and his accent. I think his acting was fine. His accent, on the other hand, he tried so hard to be so perfect that it came off as very wooden. I much rather would have just not had him have the accent or a slight accent. Like Winona Ryder. Now, sometimes Winona Ryder's accent gets into a little bit of ridiculous territory too, but we'll forgive that. Everyone else was either British, Welsh, or the nationality they played. Billy Campbell from The Rocketeer played a Texan, and he had a very thick Texas accent. Quincy P. Morris. Carrie Elways played one, who eventually ended up being the husband of Lucy, Lord Arthur Holmwood, and he is every inch the Victorian-era British aristocrat. The accent's perfect. The costuming in this one was perfect. Oh, God. The costuming and art direction in this. I don't even know where to begin. It's so beautiful and saturated. And the music is so moving. It is a piece of art, as well as an entertaining movie. And it's a pretty decent adaptation. I've only read Bram Stoker's Dracula once. But they do use the want to say trick. They use the idea of journal entries and captain's log entries and newspaper articles. In this case, they're being read out loud to further the narration, the plot. It's an exposition dump is what it is. But yeah, the costuming, not only is it pretty period accurate for the most part, but the use of fabrics is wonderful. The use of color. Mina almost always seems to have shades of green. And she could be surrounded by people with shades of green, but hers always stands out. There's the scene where she's walking the streets of London and Dracula first sees her, and she's in this powdery, sagey, beautiful green suit. And there are people around her in shades of green, but they're more like dark drab hunter, and she just stands out like this ethereal little being. And Winona Ryder at the time still is, but she was in her prime of her young years. Just this little tiny ethereal pixie of a thing. The beautiful bone structure, the tiny little body. Yeah. Sadie Frost as Lucy, she just plays the coquette so beautifully. Having 3 suitors between the doctor, the Quincy Morris the Texan, and Sir Arthur, playing back and forth between all of them, just this playful little, oh my dear Quincy, talking from one thing running to the other. I mean, that's Lucy. That's the way I read her when I read the book. She doesn't mean any harm. She knows what she's got to work with, and she's working with it. Sir Anthony Hopkins brings such a gravitas to what could be a ridiculous old man role, but there's just something there that he grounds it in reality. Even though he does play it a bit eccentric, it's still grounded in reality. And Gary Oldman, oh my God. He plays 3 different versions of the same character. The warrior prince, Vlad Tepes, at the beginning, coming back from battle to find his wife has killed herself because they told her he was dead. And he renounces God and becomes a creature of the night. Then you go into old decrepit Dracula, who's plotting his revenge on God to spread whatever evil across the world. And then he finds Mina's picture and his plans change. And then you've got what I call hot Dracula, because the way they dressed him, the hair, the facial, and I'm not normally a woman for a guy with facial hair, just seethes seduction. And that was the point. He was trying to seduce Mina. The set's beautiful, the costumes, the soundtrack, just between the heavy strings when there should be danger to the poignant, I'm going to say wind instruments, but I'm not 100% sure. I can't remember. But there's a poignancy at the end when it finally all ends. The music helps pull your emotions along. I love how some of the pieces were based on Gustav Klimt and his work. There's a very famous painting of his called The Kiss. And they basically took that entire outfit and made it into a robe for old Dracula. His armor at the beginning is amazing. I believe they won Academy Awards for the art direction and costume design. And let's not even get started on the effects because I'll be here all day, but I'm going to narrow this down to a few things. One, all the special effects were done practically or film trick from the turn of the century. There was no CGI used to do the scene transitions. There's one scene transition where there's a train going through a tunnel, and the light at the end of the tunnel turns into a peacock eye, which blends out from the foreground and shows the next scene. Ring of fire into the sun the next morning. Those kind of transitions were all done with old film tricks. Watch Dracula's shadow. It's like Peter Pan's shadow. It does what it wants. That was all done in-house. Or not in-house, but in frame as a practical effect. There's a point where they filmed Lucy backwards and then ran it the other way to give it this kind of underworldly kind of movement. The tricks were great, and that was actually done by Roman Coppola, Francis's son, because they tried to take it to an effects house, and they're like, no, we'd have to do all this digitally, and he's like, no, fine, we'll do it in-house. Sonny boy. So yeah, they did kind of keep it in the family, but I think that was a good thing. I know I keep saying this, but I cannot say this enough. This is like my favorite vampire film of all time, and I love vampire films. Vampire films are up there in my lexicon of movies that I have watched. Whether it's more of an action style piece like Blade, your more modern romantics like Interview with the Vampire. I've even seen some science fiction vampire stuff. Bad late night vampire. Cheesy vampire. I love it all. But this is like, if you tell me I have to pick one vampire movie that I can watch for the rest of my life, it's going to be this one. It's based on a solid story that's very popular. And I know it's been done before. I mean, we had Lugosi do it. This actually borrows some lines from the Lugosi era. And I don't remember if they're actually lines from the book. Again, I read it once and it was a few years ago. I would like to reread it again, but time's an issue sometimes. But the when the wolves start howling, the whole children of the night, what sweet music they make. They do that line. I never drink wine. They do that line. On a side note, I was actually at our local zoo for the Christmas lights that they do, and we were walking through the area with the wolves, and the wolves started to howl, and I looked at my husband, and I actually used that line. And my husband laughed at me. I'm like, what? And he's like, that is so you. Yeah, this is probably the vampire movie I would pick if I could only have one. Now, if I could have two, The Lost Boys would be the second one. And we will discuss that at a later date. Again, I know I keep saying this. It's sumptuous. It's luscious. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful love story. Even though it wasn't originally meant to be a love story from the source material. It does a nice job of marrying the idea of Dracula from the Bram Stoker book to the history of the real Vlad Tepes, Dracula, son of the Dracul from the Order of Dracul. Look into your Vlad Tepes history. It's very interesting. That's a whole other rabbit hole you can fall down. I would recommend doing it if you like medieval history. It's gory, but it's worth it. On that note, my creeplings, I bid thee farewell, and until next time, have a good night.